The envelope trembled in Ryan's hands as he stared at the toxicology report. The letters danced before his eyes like silent accusations. Across the room, Eleanor organized his father's medication with her usual calm, humming some tune. For an instant, their gazes met. She smiled, a smile that he now recognized as the perfect mask for what hid behind those eyes. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us what city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The Miller family home had always been imposing in the exclusive neighborhood of Greenwich, Connecticut. With its 3 stories and meticulously kept garden, it was the kind of residence that made passers-by slow down to admire. But in recent months, something had changed. The curtains remained closed longer, the garden no longer displayed its former vigor, and a strange silence seemed to inhabit those walls. Ryan Miller parked his car in the driveway and sighed. It had been another exhausting day at the company he had inherited from his father. At 42, he carried the weight of an empire that Arthur Miller had built. With his own hands, an empire that ironically now consumed all his time, while the true heir, his father, slowly wasted away in a second-floor bedroom. He still remembered his father from before, a man with a firm voice and elegant posture, who woke before sunrise to tend to the garden. The same man who, at 75, still chaired important meetings and kept his mind as sharp as a tack. But that was before the mysterious illness that appeared without clear explanations, before Eleanor took over her father-in-law's care out of love, as she herself said. Ryan entered the house, feeling the air conditioning cool his skin. The house was too silent for such a large residence. "I'm home," he announced, placing his leather briefcase on the living room coffee table. Eleanor emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her smile lit up the room. Dark curls fell in perfectly tousled waves over her shoulders, green eyes that seemed to read thoughts, and that way of walking that still mesmerized him after 8 years of marriage. "You're home early today," she commented, approaching for a quick kiss. "Do you want to have dinner now?" "I made that lasagna you like." "How's my father?" Ryan asked, ignoring the mention of dinner. Eleanor's smile wavered for a fraction of a second, so quickly that if Ryan hadn't known her so well, it would have gone unnoticed. "He's resting now. He had a good day, even ate a bit more at lunch," she replied, returning to the kitchen. "The doctor said these fluctuations are normal at his age." Ryan frowned. "What doctor? Dr. Peterson was here today?" No, Eleanor replied with her back to him, stirring something on the stove. "I spoke to him on the phone. You know how busy he is." Something about that answer sounded strange to Ryan, but he was too tired to press the issue. He climbed the stairs slowly, feeling the day's weight on his shoulders. The second-floor hallway was dimly lit, illuminated only by the faint light coming from his father's room. He approached the slightly open door and peeked in. Arthur Miller lay on the king-size bed that occupied the center of the room. The thick curtains blocked out natural light, creating an artificial environment where day and night blurred. The old man seemed to be asleep, but his face had a pallor that didn't match someone who, according to Eleanor, was having good days. Ryan entered silently and sat on the edge of the bed. The smell of medicine mingled with the lavender scent Eleanor used to perfume the room. There were several bottles organized on the nightstand, all with handwritten labels, without pharmacy or hospital identification. "Dad," he called softly, touching the old man's hand. Arthur opened his eyes slowly. Dilated pupils tried to focus on his son's figure. A slight tremor ran across his parched lips. "Ryan," the voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "How are you feeling today?" Arthur tried to adjust himself in bed, but the effort seemed to drain all his energy. I don't know what's happening to me," he mumbled with difficulty. I feel strange. Ryan felt a knot form in his throat. His father, who once commanded meetings with dozens of executives, now could barely form a complete sentence. "Eleanor said you ate well today," he commented, trying to find some positive sign. Arthur frowned as if trying to remember. "I'm not hungry. The tea, she always brings the tea." His voice faded and his eyes began to close again. "What tea, Dad?" But Arthur had already fallen back asleep, his breathing heavy and irregular. Ryan stayed there, watching his father's chest rise and fall, feeling a growing unease within him. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just age or a natural illness. Something more was happening in that house, under the same roof where he had grown up believing he was always safe. He got up and began to examine the medicine bottles. None of them had leaflets, just handwritten labels with times and doses. He opened the nightstand drawer and found a small notebook. Flipping through it, he saw meticulous notes on medications, times, reactions, all written in Eleanor's impeccable handwriting. A sound at the door made him quickly put the notebook away. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her face a mask of concern. "Did he wake up?" she asked, entering the room with silent steps. "For a moment," Ryan replied, feeling strangely guilty, as if he had been caught doing something forbidden. "He mentioned a tea." Eleanor smiled as she adjusted the blankets around Arthur with almost exaggerated care. "It's a calming tea that the naturopath recommended. It helps with nighttime anxiety," she explained naturally. "Naturopath? Since when does my father consult naturopaths?" "Oh dear, you've been so busy with the company," Eleanor sighed, stroking his arm. "I researched a lot about complementary treatments that could help with his comfort. Dr. Peterson approved, of course." Ryan felt a wave of guilt. It was true that he had delegated practically all of his father's care to Eleanor in recent months. While he immersed himself in business, she had taken on a responsibility that, theoretically, should have been his. "I think I need to talk to Dr. Peterson," he finally said. "Maybe it's time to seek other medical opinions." Eleanor's face hardened for a second, but quickly returned to her usual serene expression. "Of course, if you think it's necessary. But wouldn't it be better to wait a bit? Your father is following a treatment. Abrupt changes could destabilize him." Ryan nodded, too tired to argue. "Let's have dinner," he said, walking towards the door. As he left the room, he didn't notice the look Eleanor cast at Arthur, a look that mixed calculation and determination. Nor did he see when she opened the nightstand drawer and took out the notebook he had been examining, tucking it into her apron pocket. Night fell over the Miller mansion, casting shadows that spread through the corners like secrets, and within those walls 3 people lived different dramas: a son divided between duty and distrust, a father battling an illness he couldn't name, and a woman whose gestures of care hid intentions no one yet dared to question. What Ryan didn't know was that the next few days would completely change his perception of what meant family, loyalty, and betrayal. And that the answer to saving his father might be closer and at the same time further than he had ever imagined. The next morning breakfast at the Miller house followed its usual ritual. Eleanor prepared toast with homemade jam, freshly squeezed orange juice, and scrambled eggs with herbs from the garden. Everything perfect, like a picture from a home decor magazine. Ryan distractedly flipped through the newspaper, but his mind was far away. The conversation with his father the night before had planted a seed of doubt that was now germinating rapidly. How could a man who had always been so healthy waste away so quickly? Why couldn't the doctors clearly identify what was happening? And most importantly, why did Eleanor always seem to have a ready answer for everything? "You're quiet today?" Eleanor commented, pouring coffee into his cup. The strong aroma filled the air between them. Ryan folded the newspaper and faced his wife. In the past, Eleanor worked as a nurse at a private hospital. That's where they met, when he visited a friend after surgery. She had charmed him with her efficiency and kindness. Now, watching her move around the kitchen with that quiet confidence, he remembered how impressed he had been with her medical knowledge. "I've been thinking about my father," he finally replied. "I think I'll call Dr. Peterson today. I want to understand his clinical picture better." Eleanor shrugged, a gesture too casual for the subject. "Feel free, but he'll probably just repeat what we already know. Advanced age, natural decline, need for palliative care." "Natural decline? My father was mowing the lawn and swimming every day less than a year ago," Ryan retorted, feeling his irritation grow. Eleanor sat at the table, her face a mask of understanding and patience. "I know it's hard to accept, my love, but often these declines in the health of the elderly happen suddenly. As medical professionals, we see it constantly." "You're not a doctor, Eleanor. You were a nurse." The words came out harsher than he intended. A heavy silence fell between them. Eleanor maintained her smile, but her eyes hardened. "You're right," she finally responded. "I'm not a doctor. I'm just the person who's here every day cleaning, feeding, medicating, while you—" She paused, taking a deep breath. "Never mind. I know the company demands a lot from you." Guilt attacked Ryan again. It was true that Eleanor had taken over all care for his father. Meanwhile, he immersed himself more and more in work, as if the company were a refuge from the slow disappearance of the man who had raised him. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to belittle your effort. I know how much you've dedicated yourself." Eleanor smiled, covering his hand with hers. Her fingers were cold, despite the warm kitchen environment. "It's okay. We're all under pressure. I just want the best for Arthur, you know that." At that moment, the house phone rang. Eleanor quickly got up to answer. Ryan watched as she spoke in a low voice, her back turned to him. Something about her posture caught his attention. A tension in her shoulders, a nervous movement of her free hands. When she hung up, her face had regained its usual serenity. "Who was it?" Ryan asked. "Wrong number," she replied quickly. "I'm going to take your father's breakfast up." Ryan watched as she prepared a tray with tea, toast, and a pot of yogurt. He noticed how she opened a small bottle and added a few drops to the tea, stirring carefully. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the bottle. "Vitamin D. The doctor said he needs supplementation," she explained without hesitation. "I'm going up. Are you going to the company now?" Ryan nodded, but an idea had popped into his mind. "Actually, I'll go later. I have some calls to make first." As soon as Eleanor went upstairs, Ryan went to his father's study on the first floor. The room, once a vibrant center of decisions, was now dusty and abandoned-looking. He went to the old solid wood desk and began searching the drawers, looking for any clue to his father's medical contacts. In the third drawer, he found a folder with medical documents. He quickly flipped through, finding routine test results from about 8 months ago. All indicated surprisingly good health for a 75-year-old man. Controlled blood pressure, cholesterol within limits, preserved kidney function. Nothing that justified the accelerated decline he was witnessing now. A noise at the door made him look up. Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for over 20 years, watched him with a worried expression. "Mr. Miller, I'm sorry to interrupt, but—" "It's all right, Mrs. Jenkins. Come in." The elderly woman with grey hair and a face marked by time closed the door behind her and approached with hesitant steps. "There's something I need to tell you, sir," she said in a low voice, as if afraid of being overheard. "It's about your father." Ryan's heart sped up. "What is it?" "Mrs. Eleanor," she began, wringing her apron between her knobby fingers. "She forbade us from entering Mr. Arthur's room. Says it's not to disturb him, but—" She hesitated. "Please, go on." The other day I was cleaning the hallway and heard your father calling for help. When I went into the room, he was agitated, saying he didn't want to take that medicine anymore. Mrs. Eleanor came in right after and told me to leave. She said he was having hallucinations because of his age. Mrs. Jenkins lowered her voice even further. But your father didn't seem confused, Mr. Miller. He seemed scared. The unease Ryan had been feeling transformed into an internal alarm. How long has this been happening, Mrs. Jenkins? It started slowly, you know. First, she dismissed the nurse, saying she would personally take care of him. Then she started keeping visitors away. Even Dr. Peterson, who used to come every week, doesn't show up anymore. She says he consults by phone now. The housekeeper seemed genuinely distressed. Your father was always so strong, so present. To see him like this wasting away, it's not right. Ryan felt a knot in his throat. Thank you for telling me this, Mrs. Jenkins. There's one more thing, she added, still hesitant. Several times in the middle of the night, I saw lights in his room, and Mrs. Eleanor leaving with small trash bags, which she takes out herself. She doesn't let us touch them. A shiver ran down Ryan's spine. Please don't mention this conversation to anyone, not even to Eleanor. The housekeeper nodded and left silently, leaving Ryan immersed in increasingly darker thoughts. He tried to find reasonable explanations for Eleanor's behavior, but each new piece of information only increased his suspicions. Determined, he picked up his cell phone and called Dr. Peterson's office, the family doctor for years. After identifying himself, he asked about his father's health. Mr. Miller, actually I haven't seen your father in almost 6 months, the doctor replied, sounding confused. Your wife informed me that you had opted for home treatment with another specialist. The floor seemed to open beneath Ryan's feet. What do you mean? She talks to you almost every week about his condition. A heavy silence fell on the line. Mr. Miller, I haven't spoken to your wife since your father's last in-person consultation in March. She cancelled all subsequent appointments. Ryan hung up the phone feeling nauseous. Eleanor's lies accumulated, forming an increasingly disturbing picture. Why was she systematically keeping the family doctor away? Why lie about conversations that never happened? He looked at the clock, almost noon. Eleanor would be busy preparing lunch. It was his chance. He climbed the stairs silently and headed to his father's room. Upon entering, he found Arthur awake, staring vaguely out the window. The old man seemed to have shrunk since the night before. "Dad," he called softly. Arthur turned his head slowly, his eyes taking a moment to focus. When he finally recognized his son, a shadow of relief passed over his haggard face. "Ryan," he murmured in a slurred voice. "You came." Ryan sat on the edge of the bed and held his father's trembling hand. It was cold and fragile like old paper. "Dad, I need you to tell me what's happening. How are you really feeling?" The old man looked quickly towards the door, as if afraid of being overheard. She's killing me," he whispered with visible effort. "The tea, the medicines, they're not what she says." Ryan's blood ran cold. The suspicion that had been growing in his mind finally took shape in his father's own words. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't exaggeration. It was real. "I'm getting you out of here today," he promised, gently squeezing his father's hand. Arthur closed his eyes, as if that simple conversation had exhausted his strength. "Be careful. She's smarter than she seems." At that moment, the sound of footsteps in the hallway made Ryan quickly let go of his father's hand. The door opened, and Eleanor entered, carrying a tray with a glass of green juice and some pills. Her smile froze when she saw Ryan there. "I thought you'd already left for the company," she said, quickly recovering. "I decided to spend some time with my father first," Ryan replied, studying his wife's face as if seeing it for the first time. Who was this woman with whom he had shared his life for 8 years, really? How had he not noticed what was happening under his own roof before? And, more importantly, how far would Eleanor be willing to go to get what she wanted? As he watched his wife administer the medication to his father with careful gestures and sweet words, Ryan felt a growing determination. It was time to act. The silent game that had been playing out in that house needed to end. What he didn't know yet was that Eleanor had already sensed his distrust and that she wouldn't give up her plans easily. Ryan drove through the streets of Greenwich, his thoughts in a turmoil. The encounter with his father and his words, "She's killing me," echoed in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. How had this happened? How had he missed the signs? He parked the car in front of a pharmacy and went inside. He needed help, someone who understood medication and could give him some guidance without raising suspicions. At the counter, a middle-aged pharmacist attended to him with a polite smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Ryan hesitated, unsure how to approach the subject. "I'm worried about my father. He's been taking some medications that I can't identify." The woman frowned. "What do you mean?" "They're medicines in unlabeled bottles, just with handwritten tags," he explained, feeling uncomfortable. "My wife takes care of him and says they're medical prescriptions, but without an official medical prescription. That's irregular, sir," the pharmacist replied with a tone of concern. "All controlled medications require a prescription, and even the simplest ones must have a patient information leaflet and manufacturer identification." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, a mix of frustration and anguish. "My father is wasting away visibly. He was a healthy man just a few months ago, and now he can barely stay awake. Symptoms include excessive drowsiness, mental confusion, progressive weakness." The pharmacist looked at him seriously. "That could indicate several things, from side effects of legitimate medication to—" She hesitated. "To what?" "Intentional poisoning," she completed in a low voice. "I'm not accusing anyone, but if you have serious doubts, you should take your father to a hospital immediately for toxicology tests." Her words confirmed the suspicions Ryan had been harboring. He thanked her and left the pharmacy feeling the weight of the decision he would have to make. He couldn't just accuse Eleanor without concrete proof, but he also couldn't leave his father in that situation any longer. He drove to the hospital where Eleanor had worked years ago. Perhaps he could find someone who knew her, someone who could offer some information about her professional past. In the Human Resources Department, he introduced himself as a husband, trying to organize old documents. The employee, a friendly woman with thick glasses, typed Eleanor's name into the system. "Oh yes, Eleanor Logan. She worked here from 2010 to 2015. "Exactly," Ryan confirmed, realizing his heart was beating faster. "She always speaks fondly of that period. Did she have any special career highlights?" The woman looked at the computer screen, reading the information. "Well, she was considered an excellent nurse, very dedicated, especially in the geriatrics department." The employee frowned slightly. "There was that incident in 2015, of course, but—" "Incident?" Ryan asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Oh, I thought you knew." The employee seemed uncomfortable. "It was an internal matter, never made official. There were suspicions about her conduct with some elderly patients who had unexpected complications, but nothing was proven, and she resigned before the internal investigation advanced." Ryan's blood ran cold. "What kind of complications?" "I don't have details, sir. That was many years ago, and more specific records are confidential," she replied, clearly regretting having mentioned the subject. "Perhaps you should discuss this with your wife." Ryan thanked her and left the hospital with his mind even more disturbed. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, forming an image he refused to fully accept. but could no longer ignore. Back in the car, he made a decision. He called his trusted lawyer, Michael Evans, a college friend who had known the family for years. "Michael, I need to see you urgently. It's about my father." "Did something happen, Ryan?" "I don't know exactly yet, but I need legal guidance. How long would it take to get a court order for independent medical examinations?" There was a silence on the other end of the line. "We're talking about something serious, it seems. I can meet you in an hour at my office." Ryan hung up and took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. He needed to act cautiously. If his suspicions were correct, Eleanor was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And if he was wrong, a simple accusation would destroy his marriage and possibly his reputation. When he arrived at the law office, Michael greeted him with evident concern. He closed the conference room door and listened attentively as Ryan recounted his discoveries and suspicions. The lawyer took occasional notes, his face growing increasingly serious. "Ryan, what you're suggesting is extremely serious," he finally said. "You're essentially accusing your wife of attempted murder." "I know." Ryan ran his hands over his tired face. "But the evidence is accumulating. The lies about the doctor, the unlabeled medications, the suspicious history at the hospital, my own father's words. All of that is circumstantial," Michael pondered. "For legal action, we would need concrete proof. How do we get that?" "The quickest way would be an emergency hospitalization of your father, claiming deterioration of his clinical condition. At the hospital, we could request comprehensive toxicology tests." Ryan nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. "What if she tries to stop it?" "You're his son. Technically, you have as much right as she does to decide on medical care, especially if there's suspicion of neglect or abuse." When he left the office, Ryan had a plan. He called a private ambulance, explaining that he needed to transfer his elderly father to St. Luke's Hospital for an emergency evaluation. Then he called Mrs. Jenkins. "Mrs. Jenkins, I need you to do something for me. When the ambulance arrives, let them in without notifying Eleanor. Tell them I authorized it." "What's going on, Mr. Miller?" "I believe my father is being poisoned," he replied bluntly, "and I need to get him out of the house to confirm." There was a gasp on the other end of the line. "My goodness! I knew something was wrong. Don't worry, I'll help." Ryan drove back home, his heart pounding in his chest. Upon arriving, he saw that the ambulance was already at the entrance. Two paramedics were talking to Mrs. Jenkins at the door. Eleanor was nowhere in sight. He quickly entered and guided the men to his father's room. Arthur was sleeping deeply, his breathing irregular. The paramedics quickly examined him. "Low blood pressure, weak pulse, dilated pupils," one of them commented. "We'll need a stretcher." As they prepared Arthur for transport, Ryan heard quick footsteps in the hallway. Eleanor appeared at the door, her face a mask of indignation and confusion. "What's going on here? Who authorized this?" "I authorized it," Ryan replied, keeping his voice firm. "My father needs proper hospital care." Eleanor's face paled. For a moment her eyes narrowed in a way Ryan had never seen before. Cold, calculating, but she quickly regained her composure. "Ryan, this is absurd. He's following a treatment. Moving him like this, unprepared, could be dangerous." "More dangerous than leaving him here?" Ryan retorted, his eyes fixed on hers. A tense silence settled between them, while the paramedics continued to prepare Arthur. Eleanor looked at the men, then at her husband, a slow understanding dawning on her face. "You think she began, her voice trembling. "Are you accusing me of something, Ryan?" "I'm not accusing anyone. I just want my father to be examined by independent doctors." Eleanor took a step towards him, her eyes welling up. "After everything I've done for him, I sacrificed my career, my social life, everything to take care of your father while you barely showed up at home." The paramedics seemed uncomfortable with the scene, but continued their work. They had already placed Arthur on the stretcher and were preparing to take him. "Ma'am, if you wish to accompany the patient, you can come with us in the ambulance," one of them offered. "It won't be necessary," Ryan intervened. "I'll go with my father. My wife can meet us at the hospital later." The look Eleanor shot Ryan contained something he had never seen before, a mixture of fury and cold calculation that sent chills down his spine. "You'll regret this," she whispered, just for him to hear. As the ambulance departed with Ryan and Arthur, Eleanor remained at the mansion door, watching. To anyone passing by, she looked like merely a worried wife. But her eyes told another story, that of someone whose plans had been interrupted and who now needed to adapt her strategy. Inside the ambulance, Ryan held his father's fragile hand, promising himself that he would discover the whole truth, no matter how painful it was. Arthur, still unconscious, breathed with difficulty, the years of vitality seemingly lost in a few months. "Hang in there, Dad," Ryan murmured, feeling his throat tighten. "We'll find out what's happening to you." The paramedic checked his vital signs again, his face serious. "He's stable, but we'll need to run some urgent tests. You mentioned suspected poisoning?" Ryan nodded. "I want a complete toxicology screen, and please don't allow my wife to be alone with him at any point." The man gave him an understanding look, asking no questions. He had seen similar situations before, families divided by dark suspicions, broken trusts, loyalties put to the test. As the ambulance cut through the Greenwich traffic, sirens blaring their urgency, Ryan looked out the window at the darkening sky. A storm was approaching, both on the horizon and in his life, and he knew that after that day, nothing would ever be the same. St. Luke's Hospital was an imposing structure in downtown Greenwich. Its polished floors and pastel-colored walls tried to soften the naturally tense atmosphere of a place where life and death daily contended for territory. Ryan accompanied his father's stretcher to the emergency area, where a team was already awaiting them, alerted to the possibility of poisoning. Dr. Laura Preston, a middle-aged physician with keen eyes and precise gestures, took over the case. As she examined Arthur, she asked Ryan direct questions. "How long has he been experiencing these symptoms?" "It started subtly about 6 months ago, but in the last few weeks it worsened drastically." "Any medication you know he's taking?" Ryan hesitated. "That's precisely the problem. My wife administered the medications, but I can't identify exactly what they were. Unlabeled bottles, just with handwritten notes." The doctor raised her eyebrows, but maintained her professionalism. "We'll do blood, urine tests, and a gastric lavage for toxicological analysis. We'll also evaluate liver and kidney function, as well as an electrocardiogram." As she spoke, the team was already collecting samples and connecting Arthur to monitors. The old man remained unconscious, his face ashen under the hospital's cold lights. "How long until we have results?" Ryan asked, feeling his anxiety grow. "Some basic tests can come back in hours. The more specific toxicology tests can take days, depending on what we're looking for." Ryan nodded, watching the nurses work with silent efficiency around his father. It was strange to be there, in that sterile, technical environment, after months of seeing his father waste away in the elegant room of the mansion. In a way, the clinical coldness of the hospital seemed more honest than Eleanor's superficially affectionate care. After the initial procedures, Arthur was transferred to the ICU. Ryan sat in the waiting room, physically and emotionally exhausted. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating with messages and calls from Eleanor, all ignored. He needed time to think, to process what was happening. He was interrupted by the arrival of Michael, his lawyer. His friend sat beside him, his expression grave. "How is he?" "Stable, but weak. They're running a battery of tests." Michael nodded. "I got the court order we requested. No one, other than you and the medical team, will be able to access him without express authorization. Thank you, Ryan replied, feeling some of the weight on his shoulders lift. Do you think I'm overreacting, that I might be committing a terrible injustice against Eleanor? The lawyer considered the question for a moment. What does your gut tell you? Not jealousy, not pride, not fear. Your deepest instinct. Ryan closed his eyes, letting the question echo. The image of Eleanor carefully preparing his father's tea, the lies about the doctor, the discovery of her hospital history, Arthur's weak but decisive words. She's killing me. Everything pointed to a truth his heart refused to fully accept, but his mind had already embraced. My gut tells me my father is being slowly poisoned, he finally answered, his voice low and firm, and that Eleanor is responsible. The moment he uttered the words, he felt something change within him, as if naming the monster made it more real, but also less frightening. Now there was a concrete enemy, not just an undefined shadow. In that case, Michael said, we need to prepare. If the tests confirm your suspicion, this will become a police matter. Before they could continue their conversation, the receptionist called for Ryan. Eleanor had arrived and was demanding to see him. Exchanging a look with Michael, he headed to the main lobby. Eleanor stood near the entrance, her face a studied mix of indignation and concern. She wore a simple, elegant dress, her hair pulled back in an unassuming bun, the perfect image of a devoted wife worried about her father-in-law's health. Finally, she exclaimed upon seeing him, why aren't you answering my calls? How is your father? Why didn't you let me come in the ambulance? Ryan maintained a safe distance. He's being examined. They're going to do toxicology tests. Eleanor's face hardened for an instant, but quickly returned to her concerned expression. Toxicology. Why? Do you think he's being... She stopped, as if the idea was too absurd to verbalize. Poisoned? Yes, that's exactly what I think. People around them began to cast curious glances in their direction. Eleanor took a step forward, lowering her voice. Have you lost your mind after everything I've done for him, for us? Ryan kept his gaze fixed on hers, searching for the truth in the eyes he once believed he knew so well. What exactly did you do, Eleanor? What was in those unlabeled bottles? Why did you lie about talking to Dr. Peterson? What really happened at that hospital where you worked? Her face paled. For a moment, Ryan glimpsed something behind the mask, something cold and calculating that made his stomach churn. But Eleanor was good at the game she played. Quickly, tears welled up in her eyes. I can't believe I'm hearing this, she whispered, her voice choked. Are you accusing me of poisoning your father? The man I cared for, as if he were my own father when you were too busy with the company to pay attention to him? Some people were already stopping to observe the scene. Eleanor knew how to create a spectacle, Ryan had to admit. I'm not accusing anyone yet, he replied, keeping his voice low. I'm just looking for answers. The tests will show what's really happening to my father. Eleanor wiped a tear with the back of her hand in a gesture that seemed rehearsed for maximum impact. And what will you do when those tests show that your father is simply aging, that his illness is natural? Will you apologize for destroying our marriage with these absurd accusations? There was something in her confidence that bothered him, as if she were certain the tests wouldn't reveal anything, or perhaps... The doctors are doing comprehensive toxicology tests, he emphasized, carefully observing her reaction, including unusual substances that may not appear in standard tests. A flicker of something, concern, calculation, passed through her eyes, so quick he might have imagined it. Do what you think is best, Ryan, she finally replied, composing herself. But know that you're throwing away 8 years of marriage based on paranoid fantasies. When you realize your mistake, it might be too late for us. She turned to leave, but stopped and looked back. "Can I at least see your father? He must be scared in a strange environment." "No," Ryan replied firmly. "There's a court order preventing anyone, other than me and the medical team, from having access to him." Eleanor's mask completely dropped for a second. Her eyes gleamed with a cold fury Ryan had never seen before. But soon, the worried and hurt expression returned. "A court order? Against me? Do you really think I would be capable of—" She left the sentence hanging, shaking her head as if the idea was too absurd to verbalize. "It's just a precaution," Ryan replied without relenting, "until we understand what's happening." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, as if evaluating him in a new light. "You'll regret this, Ryan. Not because of me, but because of yourself. Some truths are too hard to accept." Without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked towards the exit, her back straight, with the dignified posture of someone unjustly accused. Ryan watched her leave, feeling a mix of doubt and determination. Part of him wanted to believe he was making a terrible mistake, that Eleanor was really the devoted wife she appeared to be. But another part, increasingly larger, knew he had unmasked something dark and dangerous. Returning near the ICU, he found Dr. Laura talking with Michael. The grave expression on both their faces made his heart race. "What happened?" The doctor indicated a private room. Once they were all seated, she opened a medical chart. "Mr. Miller, preliminary results from your father's tests show some concerning findings," she began, her tone professional. "We detected elevated levels of certain medications in his blood, in combinations that would not normally be prescribed." "What kind of medications?" he asked, feeling his mouth dry. "A mixture of potent sedatives, antipsychotics in higher than recommended doses, and most concerning, traces of heavy metals suggesting prolonged exposure." "Poison," Ryan murmured, the word coming out as a breath. "We cannot categorize it definitively yet, but the combination is highly unusual and potentially lethal in the long term," the doctor cautiously replied. "We are running more tests to identify other substances that may be present at toxic levels." Michael leaned forward. "Doctor, would these findings be consistent with intentional poisoning?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Let's say it's extremely unlikely that this combination of substances was administered accidentally or as part of a legitimate medical treatment." Ryan closed his eyes, feeling the reality of the situation crash over him like a cold wave. There was no denying it anymore. Eleanor, the woman with whom he shared his bed, his life, his dreams, was systematically poisoning his father. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "From a medical standpoint, we will begin treatment to remove the toxins from his system and try to reverse the damage," Dr. Laura replied. "But I must warn you that depending on the exposure time, some effects may be permanent." "And from a legal standpoint?" Ryan looked at Michael. "With these results, we have sufficient grounds to file a police report," the lawyer gravely responded. "The police will need to investigate, and your wife will likely be called in for questioning." The word wife sounded strange now, as if it belonged to a language Ryan no longer spoke. Eleanor was no longer his wife. She was a stranger, a threat, a criminal. "Do whatever is necessary," he finally said. "I want justice for my father." As night fell over Greenwich, Ryan remained seated beside Arthur's bed in the ICU, watching the mechanical rise and fall of the respirator. The doctors had induced a coma to protect the old man's brain, while detoxification treatment was initiated. There were no guarantees of full recovery, only hope. Outside the hospital, dark clouds gathered, announcing a storm. Ryan looked at his father's sleeping face, trying to find, in those familiar features, the strong, vibrant man he had always known, and he wondered if he would ever get him back. not just free from the poison running through his veins, but also free from the memories of what he had suffered at the hands of someone who should have protected him. Eleanor's betrayal was like an abyss opening beneath his feet, swallowing everything he believed to be true. And as the night wore on, Ryan knew that the real nightmare was just beginning. The rain poured in cascades over the city when Detective Marcia Reed entered the Miller mansion. Accompanied by 2 investigators and forensics specialists, Ryan received them in the living room, his face etched with sleepless nights. 3 days had passed since Arthur's hospitalization, and things were moving quickly. "Thank you for coming personally, Detective," Ryan said, leading her through the house. Marcia Reed was known in Greenwich for her competence and discretion in cases involving high society families. A woman in her 50s, with short-cropped grey hair and a penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond appearances. "It's a delicate case, Mr. Miller," she replied. "Accusations of attempted murder against your wife are not something we take lightly." "I understand," Ryan nodded. "Where do we start?" "With the locations where the alleged medications were stored and prepared." Ryan led the team to his father's bedroom. The room remained exactly as it was on the day Arthur was removed. The bed made, the medicine bottles lined up on the nightstand, the small cart where Eleanor prepared the daily medication and tea. The forensic specialists immediately began their work, collecting bottles, photographing everything, searching for fingerprints. Meanwhile, the detective observed the environment with a clinical eye. "Where is your wife now?" "I'm not sure," Ryan replied. "She hasn't returned home. Since the day I took my father to the hospital, she took some clothes while I was out and disappeared." The detective raised her eyebrows. "That doesn't speak in her favor. Have you tried to contact her?" "She's not answering my calls. Her lawyer contacted me yesterday, saying she's traumatized by the unjust accusations and will only speak through him from now on." Marcia jotted something in her notepad. "We'll need to find her. Flight can be interpreted as an admission of guilt." One of the forensic specialists approached, holding a small, dark glass bottle. "Detective, we found something interesting. This bottle contains residues of a substance that appears to be arsenic." Ryan felt his blood run cold. Arsenic. The word evoked stories of calculated murders, slow and painful deaths. "Arsenic," he repeated, incredulous. "It's a preliminary suspicion," the specialist explained. "We need to confirm it in the lab, but the residue has characteristic appearance and odor." The detective turned to Ryan. "Mr. Miller, does your wife have any medical or chemical knowledge?" "She was a nurse," he replied automatically. "She worked in a hospital for years before we got married." Marcia nodded as if confirming something she already suspected. "Nurses have access and knowledge of various substances, including poisons." The investigators continued searching the room until one of them found something under the floorboards near the bed. It was a small, dark wooden box, exactly like the one Ryan had partially seen under the bed weeks before. With gloves, the investigator opened the box. Inside were several bottles similar to those on the nightstand, but without any identification, not even the handwritten labels. There was also a syringe, a small notebook, and old news clippings. The detective carefully leafed through the notebook. "These are detailed notes on dosages, reactions, symptoms. It looks like an experiment diary." Ryan approached to see. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's, but the content seemed to come straight out of a horror movie. Cold, clinical descriptions of how Arthur reacted to different treatments. Observations on which substances caused greater drowsiness, confusion or weakness, without leaving obvious signs. "My God," Ryan murmured, feeling nauseous. "This is methodical." "Criminals like your wife often keep records," the detective commented. "It's part of the control they like to exert." The word criminals applied to Eleanor still sounded strange to Ryan's ears, even with all the accumulating evidence. The investigator, examining the newspaper clippings, let out an exclamation. "Detective, I think we have something here." They were old news articles about suspicious deaths of elderly people. In some, the names were circled in red. One clipping from 8 years ago mentioned the death of an elderly businessman who had left his fortune to his young wife just 3 months after their marriage. "We need to check each of these cases," the detective said, placing the clippings in an evidence envelope. Ryan felt his legs weaken and had to sit on the edge of the bed. The enormity of what he was discovering was too much to process. It wasn't just his father. Eleanor seemed to have a history, a pattern. "Are you all right, sir?" the detective asked, observing him closely. "I'm trying to understand," Ryan replied, his voice hoarse. "How did I not notice? How did I live 8 years with this person and see nothing?" Marcia Reed sat beside him, her voice softening slightly. "People like your wife are extremely skilled at hiding their true nature. They study others, learn exactly what they need to project to gain trust. You are not the first victim of this type of manipulation, nor will you be the last." The word victim echoed in Ryan's mind. He, who had always considered himself strong and astute in business, had been completely deceived in his personal life. "Who is she really?" he murmured, more to himself than to the detective. "That's what we're going to find out," Marcia replied, standing up. "My team will continue collecting evidence here. In the meantime, I suggest you remain at the hospital with your father. If Eleanor tries to make contact or shows up there, do not confront her. Just notify us immediately." Ryan nodded, feeling as if he were living in an alternative reality. As the team continued their work, he went up to his father's study and sat in the old leather armchair. The room still carried his father's characteristic scent, a mixture of old aftershave and the faint aroma of cigars he occasionally smoked in secret against medical recommendations. He opened the desk drawer and found the old family photo album. Images of his father, young, strong, smiling alongside his mother, whom Ryan barely knew, having passed away when he was only 5. Photos of Arthur teaching his young son to ride a bike, to swim, to drive. A man who had always been present, even with all the responsibilities of business. And then, like an intruder in family memories, more recent photos with Eleanor appeared. Their wedding, celebrated with pomp. Eleanor smiling beside her father-in-law at holiday parties. Images of a happy family that now seemed grotesquely false. Ryan's phone vibrated. It was a message from Michael. "Meeting with the prosecutor tomorrow at 10 a.m. They are considering a request for an arrest warrant." Arrest warrant! The word seemed unreal. Eleanor, the woman he met in a hospital, who charmed him with her apparent dedication to patients, who promised eternal love at the altar, could end up behind bars, accused of trying to kill his father for money. Because that's what it was about, in the end. Money. The empire built by Arthur, which would one day be Ryan's, and by extension, Eleanor's, unless Arthur lived long enough to realize his daughter-in-law's true intentions and change his will. The phone rang again. This time, it was from the hospital ICU. "Mr. Miller, this is Dr. Laura. Your father is showing signs of consciousness. I believe he'll be awake soon." Ryan felt a wave of relief and hope. "I'm on my way." When he arrived at the hospital, the rain had diminished to a fine drizzle. In the parking lot, he instinctively looked around, half paranoid at the possibility of finding Eleanor lurking. But there was no sign of her. In the ICU, Dr. Laura greeted him with a tired smile. "Your father is responding well to treatment. Toxin levels in his blood are decreasing, and his brain does not appear to have suffered permanent damage, at least not in preliminary tests." "Will he make a full recovery?" Ryan asked, following the doctor to his father's bedside. "It's too early to tell," she replied honestly, "but I'm optimistic. Your father seems to have an extraordinarily strong constitution for his age. Arthur was lying down, still connected to monitors and with a feeding tube, but his eyes were half open. When Ryan approached, the old man's gaze focused on him, and a slight tremor in his lips suggested an attempt at a smile. "Dad?" Ryan held the old man's hand gently. "You're safe now." Arthur weakly squeezed his son's hand, and a solitary tear rolled down the corner of his eye. Dr. Laura checked the monitors. "He still can't speak because of the tube, but he's clearly conscious and comprehending. This is extremely positive." Ryan sat beside the bed, holding his father's hand. "We found out everything, Dad. Eleanor won't hurt you anymore." Arthur's eyes widened slightly, and he squeezed his son's hand tighter. "The police are investigating," Ryan continued, wanting to reassure his father. "They found evidence at the house. She won't escape what she did." The old man closed his eyes for a moment, as if processing the information. When he opened them again, there was something different in them, not just relief, but a shadow of concern. "She hasn't tried to get in here," Ryan assured, interpreting his father's gaze. "There are security guards and a court order preventing her from approaching." Arthur seemed to relax a bit, but the concern didn't completely leave his eyes. Ryan understood that, even weak and hospitalized, his father was still trying to protect him. This perception made a knot form in his throat. "Rest, Dad. I'm here." Outside the hospital, inside a car parked on the opposite street, Eleanor watched the building's entrance with binoculars. Her face, once always serene and loving, now displayed a hardness few had witnessed. Beside her, in the passenger seat, a briefcase contained documents, a fake passport, and a considerable sum of money. Her original plan had crumbled, but Eleanor wasn't the type of person who gave up easily. If she couldn't get what she wanted through Arthur's slow poisoning, she would need to adapt her strategy, and Ryan, the husband who dared to defy her, would soon discover the true meaning of danger. Putting away the binoculars, Eleanor started the car and slowly drove away. The hunt wasn't over yet. It had just changed targets. A week passed since the discovery of evidence. At the mansion, Arthur showed constant improvement. He was already breathing without assistance and could communicate through short sentences. The doctors spoke of a miracle, considering the amount of poison found in his system. Ryan divided his time between the hospital and meetings with the police and prosecutors, trying to piece together the puzzle of Eleanor's true identity. And what a complex puzzle it was revealing itself to be. In the small conference room at the specialized detective agency, Detective Marcia spread photographs, documents, and news reports across the long table. Ryan and Michael watched intently. "Eleanor Logan doesn't exist," Marcia announced, pointing to a series of documents. "Or rather, she did. The real Eleanor Logan died at 3 years old in an accident in 1989. Your wife appropriated her identity at some point, probably in the early 2000s. Ryan felt as if the ground were being pulled from under his feet. "What do you mean? She has a nursing diploma. She worked in hospitals." "With very well-crafted fake documents," the detective explained, "we were able to trace part of her history. Before becoming Eleanor, she used the name Christine Mitchell in Chicago, where she worked as a caregiver for the elderly between 2005 and 2010. Before that, she was Patricia Logan in Miami." Michael examined the documents with a grave expression. "In each identity, she was close to elderly and wealthy people." "Exactly," Marcia confirmed. "And in each place, there were suspicious deaths that were never fully investigated. In Chicago, a 78-year-old retired judge died, leaving a considerable inheritance to his dedicated caregiver. In Miami, a wealthy widow died after a rapid deterioration of health, having modified her will a few months earlier to include the distant niece, who had appeared to care for her." Ryan felt nauseous. The woman with whom he had shared his bed for 8 years was not just a criminal, she was a serial killer specializing in wealthy seniors. "How did she manage to deceive me for so long?" he murmured, more to himself than to the others in the room. "People like her are sophisticated predators, Mr. Miller," the detective replied. "They meticulously study their victims. They know exactly which buttons to push, what image to project. In your case, she probably realized that you, a busy businessman with an elderly wealthy father, would be the perfect target. Marriage was just part of the strategy to reach her true objective. My father," Ryan concluded, his voice choked. "His fortune," Marcia gently corrected. "Your father was just an obstacle." "How long had she been planning this?" The detective sighed. "Hard to say precisely. By previous patterns, she usually stays 2 to 3 years with each identity before disappearing and resurfacing elsewhere. With you, it was 8 years, a considerably longer investment." "Perhaps because the prize was greater," Michael commented. "Mr. Arthur's estate is significant, even by the standards of wealthy individuals." One of the investigators entered the room, interrupting the conversation. He approached the detective and whispered something in her ear. Marcia frowned and nodded. "We have new information," she announced. "The lab completed the analyses of the products found in your father's room. In addition to arsenic, we found a combination of sedatives, antipsychotics, and a rare substance extracted from a plant called aconite." "Aconite?" Ryan repeated, confused. "It's known as the queen of poisons. It causes symptoms that can be easily confused with natural illnesses, weakness, numbness, heart problems. It's very difficult to detect in standard toxicology tests." Ryan remembered the tea Eleanor prepared daily for his father, the strange metallic aroma he sometimes noticed. A shiver ran down his spine. "She knew exactly what she was doing," he murmured. "And she was documenting everything," Marcia added. "The notebook we found is practically a diary of experiments, testing different combinations and doses to find the perfect balance, strong enough to kill slowly, subtle enough to appear natural." A court officer entered the room, handing an official envelope to Michael, who opened it quickly. "The arrest warrant has been issued," the lawyer announced. "Now we just need to find her." "We've already issued alerts at airports, bus terminals and borders," the detective informed them. "But honestly, with her experience in changing identities and disappearing," Ryan didn't need her to complete the sentence, "Eleanor, or whatever her real name was a master of evasion. 8 years living with her, and only now did he realize he had never truly known her. "We need to reinforce my father's security," he said, standing up abruptly. "If she couldn't get what she wanted by slowly poisoning him, she might try more direct methods." The detective nodded. "We've already requested police protection for both of you, but considering her profile, I doubt she'll try anything so obvious now. Criminals like her prefer to disappear and start over somewhere else with another identity, another target." Despite the reassuring words, Ryan couldn't calm down. Something told him Eleanor wouldn't give up so easily, not after 8 years of investment. "I need to go back to the hospital," he said, gathering his belongings. "A plainclothes officer will accompany you," the detective informed him. "And there will be another at your father's room door. Be careful, Mr. Miller. Until we know exactly who your wife is and what else she's capable of, we can't let our guard down." On the way to the hospital, Ryan watched the city through the car window, the familiar streets of Greenwich, now seeming strangely alien. As if, along with Eleanor's true identity, the rest of his life had also been revealed as an illusion. He remembered the day he met her in the hospital hallway where she worked. He had gone to visit a friend after surgery, and she was there, organizing medications, her face serene and focused. When their eyes met, she smiled, a smile that seemed so sincere, so true. They exchanged a few words, and he was impressed by her apparent intelligence and compassion. He asked for her number. She hesitated, another part of the performance, he now realized, but eventually agreed to coffee. The rest was like a fairy tale. She was everything he could wish for: attentive, intelligent, caring, and especially kind to his father, who quickly became charmed by his future daughter-in-law. Arthur, always reserved and skeptical of his son's girlfriends, let his guard down completely with Eleanor. Another sign Ryan should have noticed. Eleanor knew exactly how to win over the old man. The marriage came quickly, another detail that now seemed suspicious. She subtly rushed things, talking about biological clocks, the desire to start a family while Arthur was still strong enough to meet his grandchildren. All perfectly calculated arguments to hit Ryan and his father's sensitive spots. And then, after the marriage, the children she mentioned so much never came. There was always an excuse: her career at the moment, some temporary health issue, the need to enjoy being a couple more before expanding the family. More lies, he now realized. Children were never part of her plans. They would only be complications to her true objective. The car stopped in front of the hospital. The plainclothes officer, a discreet, middle-aged man who introduced himself only as Officer Stone, accompanied him to the entrance. In the lobby, a nurse approached Ryan, appearing agitated. "Mr. Miller, good thing you arrived. We were trying to contact you." Ryan's heart pounded. "Did something happen to my father?" "No, he's fine," she quickly reassured him. "It's just that there was an attempt by someone to access his room about an hour ago." "Eleanor?" he asked, feeling his blood run cold. "We don't know. A woman wearing a nurse's uniform tried to enter, claiming she needed to administer medication, but the officer at the door asked for identification, and she said she had forgotten her badge. When he insisted, she simply disappeared." Ryan and Officer Stone exchanged worried glances. "Did the security cameras record it?" Officer Stone asked. "Yes, but she was wearing a surgical mask and cap. You could only see her eyes." "I need to see those images," Officer Stone said. "And we need to alert Detective Reed." While the officer communicated with the detective agency, Ryan rushed to his father's room. The guard at the door verified his identity before allowing him entry, a procedure that once seemed excessive, but for which he was now deeply grateful. Arthur was sitting in bed, watching the news on the small television in the room. He seemed stronger, colors gradually returning to his face. When he saw his son, he offered a tired smile. "Son." His voice was still weak, but much firmer than in previous days. Ryan hugged his father carefully, feeling the fragility of the thin body. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Arthur replied. "The doctor said I might be able to go to a regular room in a few days." Ryan sat in the chair beside the bed. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Eleanor tried to get in here today." The smile vanished from Arthur's face, replaced by an expression of alarm. She hasn't given up?" "It seems not. But don't worry. Security has been reinforced. She won't be able to get near you." The old man shook his head slowly. "It's not about me I'm worried, Ryan. It's about you." A chill ran down Ryan's spine. "What do you mean?" "She's more dangerous than you imagine." Arthur paused, breathing with some difficulty. "In recent months, when she thought I was too sedated to understand, she would say things about other jobs she did, about how she had plans for the family's fortune after I passed on." "What kind of plans, Dad?" Arthur's tired eyes fixed on his son's. "She never intended to share anything with you, son. Once I was out of the way, you would be next. She was already testing things in your food, too, in smaller doses so you wouldn't notice." Ryan's stomach churned at the revelation. He remembered the times he had felt inexplicably tired after meals prepared by Eleanor, the days when his mind seemed strangely foggy at work. Symptoms he had attributed to stress, to sleepless nights worrying about his father. "My God," he murmured, running a hand over his face. "She's not a normal person, Ryan," Arthur continued with effort. "In moments when she thought no one was looking, I saw something in her eyes, something cold, calculating, empty." A sound at the door made both of them turn. Officer Stone entered, his face tense. "Mr. Miller, we just checked the cameras. The woman who tried to enter was definitely your wife, even with the disguise. And there's more. A cleaning staff member reported that their locker was broken into. Potentially dangerous cleaning chemicals are missing." Ryan felt the air leave his lungs. Eleanor was not only in the hospital, but she was armed with chemicals, and if she couldn't get to Arthur... "I need to get my father out of here now," he said, standing up. "She'll try again, and we can't risk it." "Agreed," Officer Stone replied. "The detective is sending reinforcements, and we're arranging a transfer to a military hospital with reinforced security." Ryan looked out the room window, watching the night fall over the city. Somewhere out there, Eleanor waited, planned, prepared for her next move. And for the first time, he wondered if he truly knew the limits of the woman he had called his wife. In the hospital parking lot, inside a different car than she had used days before, Eleanor observed the unusual movement of police officers. Her eyes, usually warm and loving when she was with Ryan, now displayed only a cold, calculating determination. In her hand, she held a small vial containing a mixture she had prepared herself. Undetectable, lethal, perfect. The plan needed to be adjusted once again, but Eleanor had patience. After all, waiting 8 years to get her hands on the Miller fortune already demonstrated that. And if she couldn't eliminate Arthur now, there was still Ryan. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a more interesting phase. Arthur's transfer to the military hospital occurred in the early hours of the morning, under heavy security. Ryan accompanied the ambulance in an armored car, escorted by police. Detective Marcia had insisted on the procedure, convinced that Eleanor would not easily give up her plans. As he watched the empty streets of Greenwich through the car window, Ryan felt like a character in a suspense novel, except the danger was real, and the villain was the woman who had slept by his side for 8 years, the one he had confided his secrets, his fears, his plans for the future to. The betrayal was so profound that it seemed to have contaminated every memory, every moment they had shared. At the new hospital, with security cameras in every corridor and armed police officers at the entrances, Arthur was settled into a private room. His condition continued to improve, despite weeks of systematic poisoning. The medical team spoke of remarkable recovery for a man his age after what he had suffered. "I think you have more of the Miller in you than you imagine," Ryan commented, sitting beside his father. "This stubbornness not to give up is a family trait." Arthur smiled weakly, his eyes still marked by fatigue, but more lucid each day. "We've always been tough to take down," he replied in a hoarse voice. "Your grandfather survived a shipwreck by swimming for 6 hours. I guess it's the Italian blood." It was good to see his father regaining not only his health, but also his sense of humor. During those dark weeks in the mansion under Eleanor's care, Arthur had become a ghost of himself, silent, apathetic, constantly sedated. Now, slowly, the true Arthur Miller was re-emerging. Ryan's phone vibrated. It was a message from Michael. "Need to see you. Important discoveries about H. I'm on my way to the hospital." 30 minutes later, Michael entered the room, accompanied by Detective Marcia. Both wore grave expressions that made Ryan's heart race. "What did you find?" he asked, standing up to greet them. Marcia looked at Arthur, as if assessing if he was strong enough to hear what they had to say. The old man nodded, giving permission. "We managed to identify Eleanor's true identity," the detective began, or rather her original identity, before she started using fake names. Ryan felt his stomach clench. "And who is she?" "Her birth name is Lisa Fields. She was born in Boise, Idaho in 1982, daughter of a small business owner and a homemaker. The family was comfortable but not wealthy. Lisa was considered extremely intelligent, got the best grades in school, but there were also reports of disturbing behavior." "What kind of behavior?" Arthur asked, adjusting himself in bed to listen better. "Cruelty to animals, manipulation of peers, and especially an obsession with poisons. At 16, she was sent to a boarding school after an incident involving the suspicious death of a teacher who had given her low grades." Ryan felt a chill. "She killed the teacher?" "It was never proven, but the circumstances were highly suspicious. The man died of multiple organ failure after a rapid deterioration of health. Symptoms very similar to your father's." Arthur slowly shook his head. "So, she started early." "Apparently so. After boarding school, she enrolled in nursing college. She graduated with distinction, but was fired from her first job after the unexplained death of an elderly, wealthy patient who had included her in his will." "And no one connected the dots?" Ryan asked, incredulous. "That's the problem with killers like her," Marcia explained. "They choose victims whose deaths wouldn't raise too many suspicions. Elderly, already ill people. They use poisons that mimic natural illnesses. And crucially, they constantly change identities and locations. Each case was treated as isolated in different jurisdictions." Michael cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to reveal. "There's one more thing, Ryan. Something you need to know." Ryan looked at his friend, feeling that the worst was yet to come. "What?" "We found evidence that Eleanor or Lisa was already planning her next move. There were documents in a safe deposit box registered under one of her previous identities." "What kind of documents?" "A life insurance policy in your name, Ryan. $5 million signed 2 years ago. She was the sole beneficiary." Ryan's blood ran cold. The implication was clear. Eleanor had not only planned to kill his father, he himself was on the list. "And there's more," the detective continued, her voice softening. "On your nightstand, we found a bottle containing the same mixture of substances found in your father's system, but in smaller doses, along with a diary detailing tests she had been conducting on you." Ryan remembered the mornings he woke with a strange dizziness, the inexplicable fatigue after dinners Eleanor prepared with such care, the headaches that came and went, which he had attributed to stress. It wasn't paranoia. She really was poisoning him too, slowly and methodically. "My God," he murmured, feeling his stomach churn. "For how long?" "From what we found, about 8 months," Marcia replied. "But in much smaller doses than those used with your father. She was probably just preparing the ground, leaving you vulnerable for when the right moment came." A heavy silence fell over the room. The enormity of what Eleanor had planned, the methodical murder of the entire Miller family one by one, was almost impossible to process. Ryan felt a wave of nausea and had to sit down. "Is there anything we can do for you?" Michael asked, concerned about his friend's state. "Find her," Ryan replied, his voice choked by the knot in his throat. "Just find her before she hurts anyone else." The detective nodded. "We're doing everything possible. We've issued international alerts, as we suspect she'll try to leave the country. But with her experience in changing identities—" "She'll make a mistake," Arthur interrupted, his voice surprisingly firm. People like her always do, because deep down they believe they're smarter than everyone else. Marcia smiled slightly. I hope you're right, Mr. Miller. After the detective and Michael left, Ryan remained by his father's side, both immersed in their own thoughts. Eleanor's betrayal had affected not only their lives, but their ability to trust, to believe in people. You know what's hardest to accept? Ryan finally said, breaking the silence. That I really loved her. That part of me still wants to believe there was something true in those 8 years. Arthur reached out, touching his son's arm. Don't blame yourself. People like that are masters of manipulation. They live the lie with such conviction that they almost become the character they created. But how do I move on after this? How do I trust anyone again? The old man squeezed his son's arm with surprising strength. You will, because that's how we survive, son. Not by closing doors, but by learning to choose better who we open them to. His eyes, now more lucid, fixed on Ryan's. Don't let her poison remain in you. Son, not after we manage to get rid of it from your body. The wisdom of those words hit Ryan deeply. His father was right. The real danger now was not just Eleanor out there, but allowing the trauma and distrust to poison his soul. The next morning, as Ryan had coffee at the hospital cafeteria, his cell phone rang. It was Detective Marcia. Mr. Miller, we have news. Eleanor was seen boarding a bus for Mexico at the bus terminal in Kansas City, Missouri. We are in contact with Mexican authorities. Ryan felt a mix of relief and tension. She's fleeing then? Apparently, but we'll maintain security around you for now. People like her are unpredictable. After hanging up, Ryan returned to his father's room, finding him eating breakfast with visible appetite. Another positive sign of recovery. Eleanor was seen trying to leave the country, he informed, sitting beside the bed. Arthur nodded slowly. That's good to know, but don't let your guard down. She knows she's being hunted now, and that makes her even more dangerous. His father's words proved prophetic that same afternoon when an unknown nurse entered the room carrying a tray with medications. Ryan, who had left for only a few minutes to get coffee, was returning down the hallway when he saw the man entering his father's room. Something about him, his posture, the way he furtively looked around, triggered an internal alarm. Ryan quickened his pace, reaching the door in time to see the nurse preparing a syringe with a clear liquid. "Hey!" Ryan shouted. "Who are you?" The man turned quickly, his face pale with fright. Arthur, awake in bed, seemed equally alarmed. "New nurse," the man replied with a strong foreign accent. "Antibiotic for patient." "My father isn't taking antibiotics," Ryan retorted, approaching cautiously. "Show me your badge." Instead of answering, the man suddenly lunged at Ryan, the syringe raised like a weapon. Ryan dodged by reflex, grabbing the assailant's arm. The two fell to the floor in a frantic struggle. The syringe flew away, shattering against the wall. Arthur, even debilitated, managed to press the emergency button beside the bed. In seconds, 2 armed guards and a nurse rushed into the room, finding Ryan still struggling with the intruder. The guards quickly subdued the man, handcuffing him. When they pulled off the wig he was wearing, Ryan felt his blood run cold. It wasn't a man. It was Eleanor, disguised with a short wig, a fake beard and padding that completely altered her silhouette. Her eyes, the same green eyes he had once found so captivating, now stared at him with a pure, icy hatred that seemed to come from another world. "You ruined everything," she hissed as she was restrained. 8 years to get so close. You never should have interfered." Ryan stared at the stranger he had once called his wife, trying to find any trace of the woman he had fallen in love with. There was nothing. Perhaps there never had been. "Why, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Why us?" Something shifted in her gaze, a glint of cruel amusement, as if the question were absurdly naive. "Why not? You had what I wanted, and you were so easy to manipulate. Especially you, Ryan, always so busy, so confident in your ability to judge people." She smiled, a smile completely different from any he had seen before, cold, predatory. "You know what's most pathetic? You're still looking for the Eleanor you loved. She never existed, darling, never." The guards dragged her out while she continued speaking, her voice now shrill and almost hysterical. "You think this is over? This never ends. People like you never learn, never see beyond appearances." When the hallway finally quieted, Ryan turned to his father, who watched everything with an expression of mixed shock and relief. "It's over," Arthur murmured, reaching out to his son. "It's really over." Ryan nodded, sitting heavily in the chair beside the bed. Eleanor's words echoed in his mind, cutting like blades. She never existed. The woman he had loved, with whom he had planned to build a family, share a life, had been nothing but an elaborate illusion created by a patient and calculating predator. In the following weeks, as Arthur continued his recovery, more details about Eleanor's true identity, or Lisa Fields, came to light. Authorities from 3 different states reopened cases of suspicious deaths of wealthy seniors. In her secret apartment, rented under a false name, the police found a veritable arsenal of poisons, fake documents, and diaries detailing her conquests. At least 7 elderly people she had murdered over the years, and plans for 2 more, Arthur and Ryan Miller. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Eleanor was sentenced to 120 years in prison for multiple attempted murders and consummated homicides. Throughout the entire process, she maintained a cold and distant demeanor, as if all of it were just a temporary inconvenience. Her eyes, empty of remorse or genuine emotion, observed the world as a scientist would observe a lab rat. 3 months after Eleanor's arrest, Arthur was discharged from the hospital. His recovery was not complete. Doctors warned that some damage caused by the prolonged poisoning would be permanent, but he was alive, lucid, and determined to enjoy every day he had left. Ryan drove the car that took them back home. Not the mansion where everything had happened, which had been sold, but a new, smaller, cozier house in a secure, gated community. As they passed through the familiar streets of Greenwich, a comfortable silence hung between father and son. "You know," Arthur finally said, "despite everything, I can't feel anger." Ryan shot him a surprised look. "No." The old man shook his head. "Anger consumes energy I no longer have to waste. I prefer to use what little I have left to rebuild, to move forward." Ryan reflected on his father's words. In recent months, he himself had gone through all stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression. Now slowly he was beginning to reach acceptance, not acceptance of what Eleanor had done, but of the reality that he needed to keep living, despite the betrayal, despite the pain. "Do you think I'll ever be able to trust someone again?" he asked, almost without realizing he had verbalized the thought. Arthur smiled, that wise smile he had always had, even in the worst moments. "You will. Because that's how we survive, son. Not by closing doors, but by learning to choose better who we open them to." When they arrived at the new house, Mrs. Jenkins was waiting for them at the door, along with some old staff members who had chosen to continue working for the family. Familiar faces, people who had proven their loyalty in the darkest moments. "Welcome home, bosses," the housekeeper said, her eyes welling up with emotion. Arthur smiled, leaning slightly on his son as he climbed the steps to the entrance. "It's not exactly new, Mrs. Jenkins. It's just the continuation of our story, a different page in the same book." Ryan helped his father inside, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over him for the first time in months. The old miller's words echoed in his mind, a different page in the same book. That was exactly what they needed now, not to forget the past, but to turn the page, to continue the story, despite the scars, despite the painful memories. Because in the end, what defined a life was not the poisons that tried to destroy it, but the strength to continue despite them. That night, as father and son dined together in the new dining room, much more modest than the previous one, but strangely more welcoming, Ryan realized that despite everything, there was reason for gratitude. His father was alive. The truth, however painful, had been revealed before it was too late. And now, with this second chance, they could rebuild not only their individual lives, but their relationship, stronger and closer than ever. Eleanor's poison, physical and emotional, had left its marks. But it had not achieved its final objective. It had not destroyed what truly mattered, the bond between father and son, the resilience of a family that, even reduced to two, was still stronger than any toxin. Outside, in a cold cell in a women's prison, Eleanor, or Lisa, or whatever her real name was, perhaps still plotted and dreamed of impossible revenges. But here, in this new house with old friends, life continued its course, imperfect, marked by the scars of betrayal, but still, life, still, a story worth living to the end. And as he watched his father tell an old story to Mrs. Jenkins, who laughed as if there were no tomorrow, Ryan knew, with a certainty that came from the depths of his soul, that they would be all right. That despite everything Eleanor had tried to take from them, there was something she would never be. Able to, the capacity to start anew, to trust again, to find beauty even after the darkness. Because the true poison was not in the hidden vials or the carefully prepared potions. The true poison would be to allow fear and distrust to dominate their lives from then on. And that, only that, was a poison they were determined not to accept.